I learned about it before dawn. No explosion, no battlefield images, just a calm announcement moving across screens and headlines. A president had been attacked, captured, and named publicly, not accused, not summoned, taken. I didn't react immediately, because when power speaks without trembling, the moment deserves silence. I wanted to understand what had actually changed. For decades, the world pretended. Interventions wore suits. Power hid behind words like stability, democracy, international concern. What unsettled me wasn't the act itself. It was the confidence with which it was declared, as if sovereignty had become optional, as if leadership could be removed like a technical error. They said it was about Venezuela. I knew it wasn't. This wasn't a mission. It was a message. This wasn't about one country. It was about who gets to decide. Some nations are still expected to ask permission to exist. Others reserve the right to decide who governs whom. I thought of every small country that heard the news and said, "This doesn't concern us." History is cruel to that sentence. What follows isn't about one president. It's about the day the rules stopped pretending to be equal. For years, small nations were taught etiquette disguised as wisdom. Speak softly, move carefully, never force the powerful to say the quiet part out loud. I learned that lesson not from books, but from rooms that change temperature the moment you stop agreeing. One day you're a partner, the next a concern, then a risk. And when you finally refuse to be managed, you discover something sharper than sanctions, the refusal to even pretend you're equal. This wasn't escalation, this was exposure. In the past, domination wore gloves. It arrived with committees and communiques. Even when outcomes were brutal, the performance mattered. The performance signaled restraint, the need to justify, to persuade, to pretend a moral framework still applied. Now we're watching a different phase. Power no longer argues, it declares. It doesn't request consensus. It announces decisions as if consent is irrelevant. This isn't about rules disappearing overnight. It's about the powerful signaling they can treat rules as optional, especially when the target is isolated, disliked, or disposable. People ask, why react to words? Because announcements are doctrine. Words create permission. They teach institutions how to file paperwork. They teach media how to frame reality. They teach silence what it will be rewarded for. When capture sounds routine, the next step becomes easier. When a leader is spoken of like a press release, the next target is quieter. The next protest is smaller. And slowly, sovereignty starts sounding like a luxury, not a right. Small nations repeat the oldest prayer in politics. This doesn't concern us. I've seen where that prayer leads. It leads to dependence disguised as peace, to sovereignty rented on monthly terms. Until one day you realize the only protection you have is the respect you can enforce. When power stops pretending, it doesn't become stronger, it becomes more comfortable. And comfortable dominance is more dangerous than angry dominance, because it believes no price will be paid. Reality is simple and brutal. The world doesn't punish power for acting. It punishes weakness for existing without protection. I've watched countries survive by being agreeable. They sign what they're told, open what they're told, host what they're told. They believe obedience is insurance. It isn't. It's postponement. Time bought without strength is just delayed regret. Time only matters if you spend it building the capacity to stand. That's why the public nature of this announcement matters. It wasn't just a decision, it was a lesson. Sovereignty is conditional if you can't defend it. Legitimacy is written by whoever holds the loudest pen. Institutions still exist, but watch how they behave under pressure. When the moment is inconvenient, procedures slow down. When the target is unpopular, outrage becomes selective. This isn't cynicism, it's observation, and it raises a question leaders hate to answer. Is your duty to keep smiling and hoping, or to prepare your people for the cost of dignity? I don't romanticize confrontation. It's expensive. It isolates you. It turns small mistakes into global scandals. But submission has a cost too. And submission ends the same way every time. You stop being asked. Decisions get made around you, then above you, then against you. Silence doesn't stop history, it trains it. Neutrality isn't a shield when the world is relearning capture. Silence isn't protection when precedent is being set. Quiet only guarantees that when your turn comes, fewer people will remember your name. Silence feels like wisdom, like restraint, like survival. But repeated silence becomes habit, and habit becomes doctrine. That doctrine produces a state that can be pressured without consequence, dismissed without outrage, a state that forgets how to speak in its own defense. This is why Venezuela isn't just an event. It's a mirror. What frightened me wasn't only what power did, but what the rest of the world allowed itself to become in response. When a president is captured and the reaction is careful neutrality, you're not staying out of conflict. You're training your people to accept removal as normal. The first conquest isn't land, it's imagination. You don't need an army to refuse a narrative. You don't need a navy to say, this should never be normal. But fear makes even refusal feel dangerous. Fear has names, budgets, hospitals without medicine, classrooms without books. Understanding fear doesn't mean obeying it, because there's a moment when silence stops being a tactic and becomes a fate. When a state loses the muscle to speak, others begin naming its reality, explaining its politics, interpreting its sovereignty. Control today isn't just weapons, it's framing. If the capture of a leader becomes acceptable, then the capture of a currency, an election, a government becomes easier to justify. The methods change, the hierarchy doesn't. War isn't the first proof of sovereignty. Refusal is. Refusal to internalize inferiority. Refusal to apologize for existing. Refusal to teach your children that power lives elsewhere. Neutrality is still a choice, just one made quietly. And when precedent is being rewritten, standing still means being walked over. Truth demands preparation, self-reliance, internal legitimacy, institutions that don't rely on foreign approval. That's why silence persists, because the alternative is responsibility. Doctrine isn't slogans. Doctrine is what remains after illusion burns away. No one will protect your sovereignty more than you will. Not institutions, not alliances, not treaties. They help, but they don't replace capacity. Precedent is modern power's favorite weapon. Once set, the next act shocks less, then becomes routine, then becomes policy. So what does a small nation do? It builds. Food security, because hunger is leverage. Narrative control, because information is terrain. Internal unity, because division is the easiest entry point. Defense, not to conquer, but to make conquest expensive. Preparedness isn't aggression. Vulnerability invites escalation. A door is kicked in because it looks easy. Sovereignty isn't poetry, it's daily practice. There's an old lie told to the global south. If we behave well enough, we'll be left alone. Behave well usually means surrender politely. That isn't pragmatism. It's slow surrender. Every relationship must be judged by one measure. Does it increase our ability to decide or our dependency on permission? You can't outsource food. You can't outsource narrative. You can't outsource legitimacy. And you can't outsource deterrence. The world respects boundaries when they're defended, not when they're pleaded for. Comfort is expensive. It's paid for with independence. This era has taught us something clearly. Announcements of capture without embarrassment are a warning. Doctrine isn't the promise that nothing will happen. It's the refusal to be unprepared when it does. Today it's Venezuela. Tomorrow it's another inconvenient nation. The names change. The mechanism doesn't. And that's why I speak, not as a judge, but as a witness. If this resonates, don't treat it as normal. Speak about it. Share it. Refuse silence. Because the future won't be decided only by those who announce. It will also be decided by those who refuse to be trained into silence.